Right, so today I decided to do a webinar for the Archaeological Mysteries and Books site that I started about 2 years ago. My name is Cassie Madden, and I am the creator of the Archaeological Mysteries and Books site. I created it as a side hobby to help with my maritime history research, but also my archaeological and generalised history research. My specialties are Celtic and Viking history, but also maritime history and also Middle Eastern history. So I decided to create a website, one, to share news from other amazing sites about archaeology to the general public, but also to have a place to showcase my writing, because also on the side I'm a part-time author and writer, so I do that as part of my collective side hobbies, the website, my history research and everything else that I'm doing. So I decided to try doing some webinars to start with. So this is the very first webinar, and I didn't know what to expect, but I decided to just give it a go. And so basically today I decided to have a webinar on introducing the actual website, Archaeological Mysteries and Books, and also the authorship and the writing associated that's on that website, which is done by me at this stage, and also talk about 5 interesting finds in history. So this whole webinar will only go for about 20 minutes. And then, yeah, there's also another webinar in a week's time, so I'm not too worried if we don't get many participants this time around, or any participants. So the webinar has been divided up into a brief discussion about the 5 archaeological discoveries, and then some of the readings on the website, and then the website itself. So in terms of the 5 discoveries I decided to talk about quickly, I've picked Port Royal in Jamaica, which is a major archaeological excavation hub there, and also the mummies of the Tarim Basin in Asia. That's an amazing archaeological addition. And then also the site of Roanoke in America, and also other early American European colonies, and there the settlement of European culture and in the Americas. And also in terms of written amazing discoveries, I've included the Dead Sea Scrolls as part of that. And also, finally, a discussion about the Easter Island moai, and that's very interesting. It's very hard to just narrow down and pick 5 amazing archaeological finds in history, or discoveries in history, because there's that many of them, and there's that many talented archaeologists out there doing research on a number of different areas. And when you only have 20 minutes, it's very challenging. But so I decided to do a brief discussion of these 5 areas. Now, thousands and thousands of sites and finds, it's very, very, very difficult. So the first here I'm thinking of is Port Royal in Jamaica, which is a trading port, and it was destroyed by an earthquake in June the 7th, 1692, and many of the buildings and artefacts slid under the sea during the earthquake, which created an amazing underwater site for archaeologists to find out about their early trading patterns and what happened within the early site and the port itself. So it's an amazing find, and for most of the public would know that Port Royal was an amazing trading post and maritime centre. So having an interest in maritime history, that kind of accentuates my interest in Port Royal. But it was full of pirates and other things. And so it was first settled in 1518 by as a Spanish town, and it was a strategic trading post, and then the English. It was then run by the English, and it was their big trading centre, and it was also the early port of entry for Jamaica as well. So it's an amazing site, and I think it shows early trading and also the slave trade and trading of sugar and other goods. So that's why I picked that. I think it's just really interesting. And I don't really have much time to go into too much detail about any of these sites either, so that's kind of a challenge in itself. But it's a great find for archaeologists to go and explore all the history of the trading and all that sort of stuff. Another site that I've picked, or another archaeological find I've picked, is the mummies of the Tarim Basin in Central Asia. And what interests me about those is that earlier on, so about 3,800 years ago, 4,000 years ago, they were finding remains that had European features, so red hair and like Scottish clad type clothing. So they looked Celtic and European in origin, and there was a lot of speculation about where they came from. And it showed the archaeologists where the trade through the Silk Road and where early inhabitants of that region were from. So the archaeological DNA findings actually showed that the earliest mummies were came from Europe. They had there was a lot of intermixture in that region, so they were from Europe. And they had some European DNA, especially mitochondrial DNA. So they were coming across the Kazakh steppe and into the Tarim Basin for agriculture and trade. And so that kind of findings of remains like that showed the archaeologists and public all about trade and where people were coming from, how far they were going, what they were doing, and also intermixture and all that sort of thing. So it's an amazing site. And again, I don't really have much time to go into too much detail, but I really, really recommend that as an area of study. I think it's just amazing. And then we move on to the Americas, which is interesting as well. I think any study of the Americas is great. And for that, I've picked the colony of the Roanoke colony and what happened there. It's not so much with this one what the archaeologists have found, it's more the mystery around it. So it's an early American site and colony of early settlers, and in 1587 John White went back to England for supplies and left behind many of the other people in the colony. And when he returned, the colony had vanished without a trace. So what happened to the early settlers? Did they attempt to sail back to Europe or go to another town? Were they murdered? Did they intermix with the natives? And there's many a theory around what happened. Even TV series developed based on the Roanoke colony. So it's a big thing and a big mystery that's been going on for many time. Many people have written books about it. Many people have researched it. It's kind of interesting, and everyone has their own different unique viewpoints and theories about what happened. So they went there, they ended up in Roanoke, and they kind of set up a little town, and then they disappeared. So what happened? We don't know. One archaeological excavation site shows that they had ended up at a location in another county, but using findings including pottery and other artifacts. So there's theories and there's ideas and there's many mysteries around it as well. And that settlement led the way for other European settlements, including Jamestown, and that's now they've done experimental archaeology there and rebuilt that. So it opens up dialogue for early colonization of the Americas by Europeans, and that's something that I'm fascinated by. And I just thought I would mention that briefly there. And again, my little discussion isn't doing it that much justice because there's a lot more involved. Moving on from that, I also have a fascination in documentation and the history of documents. So I've included here the Middle East and the Dead Sea Scrolls. Now, the Middle East is swimming in archaeological mystery and discoveries, written sources that open up information from scholars, including the Rosetta Stone, clay tablets, and of course the Dead Sea Scrolls. So there's many that I could have included, and it's just quite a lot to think about. The Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered, the first cave was discovered in 1946 by a boy in the limestone cliffs of the Dead Sea, and they're an amazing archaeological findings that came out of that. They help archaeologists understand the history of the Hebrews between 530 BCE and 70 CE, and the history of Christianity also. So it opens up a lot of history and research that particular area, and you can access them and research the history. So without those, scholars wouldn't have as much knowledge as they do today. So that's why I included that. And then finally, we have, because I also have an interest in Pacific history, we have the Easter Island discoveries, which I've included the Moai, those massive monuments that they built. Monumental. So the islands was settled around 300 AD. And when they first settled, there was green. It was green even earlier than that, some sources say, but it was green and full of trees. And by the time the Europeans arrived, there was no trees left. They had exploited all of their natural resources. And they had these massive statues called the Moai dotted around the island. And what had happened to their culture? Why were the statues there? Why were they Moai there? What happened? So there's a lot of interesting discoveries and archaeological research around that. There were two groups of cultures living on the island, the short-haired and the long-haired, and one actually built caves and lived under the ground. So they had depleted their resources and were trying to find innovative ways to grow crops and survive, basically, and have the food supplies and the water they needed to live on the island. And what they found out, the archaeologists, is that those moai were built near water sources, so they had stuff to do with that. There's a lot of research around that particular topic, about their culture and their belief systems and all that sort of stuff. So it's a fascinating culture, and it provides archaeologists and information about their history and what's happening there. So it's really, really fascinating and interesting. And I've mentioned it so briefly, it's not really doing it justice once more, but there are 5 interesting discoveries that I thought were worth mentioning as part of this first webinar. And next now, so because we've only got 20 minutes, there's a massive time limit. Next, we've got, I wanted to mention, because Archaeological Mysteries and Books has a strong book component, I wanted to mention the book element of this. I forgot to also mention in the first instance that I'm also a writer and also a qualified librarian as well, so kind of fits. I wanted to use this next 5 minutes to talk about the actual website, Archaeological Mysteries and Books, and also what you can access on the website itself. And I've also included a poll to ask what people are interested in seeing more of on the website, and also more of on the Facebook feeds and all that sort of stuff. Because I noticed that people like hearing news, archaeological news, and I've been sharing a lot of other people's news as well, because there are so many talented people out there and so much news out there, it's worthy of sharing. So I've been writing a few blog posts about famous authors who are writing about mysteries, such as Andy McDermott, Clive Cussler, Agatha Christie, Elizabeth Peters' books, and other authors as well. But I think it's also important to note that on the archaeological site, there is actually a page dedicated to books, which has chapters of books that I've written. And that's something really, really interesting and exciting, I think, for, well, I'm more interested in getting feedback on the book chapters and whether they're interesting to readers, whether they're not interesting, you know, if it's something that people would be excited to hear more about, excited not to hear more about, that kind of thing. And I also do have links to other authors' pages on there and things like that. So I would like everyone to go check that out and just see what's on there, if it's interesting, if it's not interesting. And I have also got some completed books that I'm in the process of trying to get published as well. So that's another interesting factor associated with the website. I'd be more interested in hearing about what books the public are interested in and what blog posts they want to hear more about. So I'll share a link to the actual website as well, just so people can have an understanding of what's on there and what's happening with that as well. So this is a very quick, brief webinar, the very first one, and I hope it's been interesting. Hopefully we'll keep getting better and better and better and better. And I also hope to do some live Facebook feeds and also have some actual content so they can have interesting pictures and stuff and not just look at my face and all the time. So that would be exciting. That's pretty much it for now. I just wanted to share the 5 archaeological sites and also remind people that there's the website and they can go on there and view book chapters and also share, send us a line and say what you're interested in seeing more of on the website to make it as interesting as possible for the public. So that's everything for now, and I'll leave it open to any questions and conclusions. Thank you.